He could tell stories probably like no one else. And he knew just your sensitive points. So if it was a story of kind of no truth, like they would do a lot in the hunting times, they knew just how to lead the certain people on, the young kids, and they would just have them at all. And then, but the other stories, you would know that they were true when they would talk about great things and spiritual things, and testimonies were involved. Yeah, he could tell some stories, and he could have everyone's attention.
He loved to be the center of all that was going on, and he loved his family, his wife most, his children second, which was a blessing to me to see that. I never felt cheated that he loved my mother so much that she came first before the kids, because it didn't take away from his love for us. We knew he loved us. And he would have just spread that love and included the grandchildren and his sons-in-law and his daughters-in-law. He loved Liz as much as he loves any of the rest of his daughters. And I'm sure that would have extended to all of the rest of the in-laws.
The relationship that he had with all of us was just love, just simple. We knew that there wasn't an ounce of love held back from him, that he loved us all unconditionally. And to diminish that at all just broke our hearts as well as his. I remember one time I came in late, and I'd been out later than I should have been. Probably in his mind I shouldn't have been out at all, and since he's always right, I probably shouldn't have been out at all. Anyway, I came home late, and he was just sitting there at the couch with the newspaper by the lamp, just reading the newspaper. And I came in just as sheepish as could be, and he says, "Oh, son, I'm glad you're home. Now I can go to sleep." That's all he had to say. So that's a whooping.
But one of the things that I remember learning a lot about discipline was when Dad and I were working. I don't know what he was doing. He was working out on the car or fixing something in the driveway or whatever. But he had this machete that he'd brought back from the war. He was on Guam or Samoa or somewhere down in the South Pacific. And he brought this machete back that was this beautiful, big, gorgeous, neat machete. And I had dug it out of all the stuff and was playing with it out in the yard and having fun with it. And joined up with him out in the driveway working on whatever he was working on. And I imagined that I just set it down on the car. And so it was sitting on the bumper or on the hood or on the something. And then was visiting with him and doing whatever. Well, once he got the car done, we drove off. And we went and ran some errands or did something. And when we came back, I remember that he asked me where the machete was. Well, obviously it was nowhere to be found. It was, miles away, having fallen off the car. I'm pretty sure it just got set down, something like that. And I remember seeing the disappointment in his face, because that was a treasure. It was a really nice memento that he had. But instead of, beating me or yelling at me or any of that kind of stuff, he just, wanted me to be more careful. And that was the worst punishment that I could have, was just watching the disappointment in his face, that he had lost, or I had lost, something nice of his that was precious to him.
Carrie and I, sometimes we misbehaved. And I remember one time that we had misbehaved. Dad was off to work, and Mom told us that we would be punished when Dad got home. Well, that's punishment enough, because now you have to sit and worry about it for an hour, maybe 2 hours. Because when Dad comes home, you're going to get it. what you're going to get. I don't know, because he was never a corporal punishment type guy. You know, he's just nice. So was Mom. So who knows what kind of punishment, but it gets your mind rolling. So in the back of our minds, it was going to be a licking. So when it neared the time that Dad was going to come home, we put books in our pants. So when he was going to give us a licking, we'd have the armor. Well, here it came time for the licking, and I don't know if it was Carrie first or me, got put on across his lap, and there was this book in the breeches, you know, and he could hardly keep from laughing. So it worked. We never got a licking because their Mom and Dad were laughing so hard. So don't tell the kids this, because we don't want them to be using these types of tactics in the future.
Yeah, that's one thing that we did do a lot is Grandpa would wrestle on the floor, and he'd lay on the floor and he'd put the kids on his feet and he'd toss them up and down. And when we'd go outside, he'd throw us up and down in the air. And he was always playing and romping and tossing and things like that. But when the grandkids came around, when Mandy was born, I remember holding her, and Grandpa was very protective. He wasn't going to be romping with her. You had to hold her very carefully, and he was right there, you know, make sure you hold her head, make sure this, make sure that. And so I suppose as they got older, he probably would have romped with them a little bit more, but he was very protective of the grandchildren.
I think maybe you need to know about how much he loves his grandchildren. He died before a lot of them were here. Many, many more of them now. I think there were maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe was it just the 2? Mandy and Mart, when he died, he worshiped the ground those 2 little children walked on. He was so proud of Galen and Liz. They were such good Mom and Dad, and still are. And those 2 little grandchildren. If he was there, they were in his arm. He'd have one in one arm and one in the other one, and Grandpa was laughing and giggling and talking just like a baby, just like they were. And when we were at the house, he would be down on the floor playing with them, you know, playing with cars or rolling a ball. Or I remember one time Mandy was sitting on his lap, and he was holding her and she was holding a little doll. But he was very proud of those 2 children. And I think probably he's here more than we know, but he would love to be part of, like we were last night, with all of the cousins and you and your brothers and sisters. And he would have loved to have been in the middle of that game, playing, laughing, giggling. He would have been the biggest kid in there, and he would have had the most unique, strange symbol or whatever sign that we were doing. And he would have made us have fun whether we wanted to or not.
I think the thing that impressed me the most about Uncle Art was that I used to think they named the children's magazine after him because he was the children's friend. Whenever we got together, the other parents were all wonderful, and we all did fun things, but they let us do our own things. Uncle Art always tried to think of things that we could do that would be fun. And I remember when they would come up to Grandma and Grandpa's in Idaho, he would talk Grandpa was kind of stern. He would talk Grandpa into letting us do things that we would never be able to do otherwise.
I remember once up in Idaho, Grandpa Barnes wouldn't let us play in the haystack, but Daddy would take us out, and then we could play in the haystack. And there was a derrick that they'd lift, I guess that's what they call it. It's like a winch that they'd hook the hay on, the bales of hay, and lift it up, and Dad made a swing out of the derrick so we could play.
He was wonderful with little children. You just knew that you had a friend. You knew that what your mind couldn't conceive, his could. And he talked to you and he listened to you. And he really cared about you. It wasn't like, go play and do something else. He was right there with us doing fun things.
I like to watch him with people. If someone was sad, he could make them happy. If someone needed laughter, he could make them laugh. And then there was those that needed a prank pulled on him, and he knew how to do that too. But he was hilarious. He was a riot to be, because he would entertain you. You could always expect something was going to happen. So that was something special.
Okay, one of the incidents I recall was the time when my dad was sick, and Wilma had been up taking care of him, and I decided I would go from California. I came and went up to the house, and Wilma was there and Arthur was there. I think he had come to pick her up, maybe to take her back. So while he was there, he said, say, Glenda, do you know how they measure people for a coffin? And for a time he'd worked with a mortuary I don't know, just doing whatever he did, but so that seemed a reasonable question for him to ask. And he says, lay down on the floor there, I'll show you. So he says, well, first you put your arms out like this, and then you put your legs out, then you put your leg up in the sky. And so I put my leg up in the sky, and the dumb goof poured a glass of water down my pant leg. We just laughed. I was already on the floor, so I just rolled around. We laughed a lot about that. And he loved to play tricks on people. He loved it.
Likewise, I don't know if I was the only one he always pulled pranks on, but I know he played plenty of them on me. But whenever he would come back, and I guess he knew I liked this stuff, I'd always have something that he would bring back, and it wasn't something given to me, it was something played on me. And maybe that's why I'm a lot like I am now, but I like practical jokes. But he would, many a time, we'd sit down to eat, and he'd just arrived, and I think Mom and him had planned, he'd more or less tell her what to have prepared, so whatever he brought back would fit into the dinner. But I remember having hot dogs, and he'd bring home rubber hot dogs, and I would always, nobody else would get them in their hot dog, just in their bun, but me. And glasses, he'd buy a set of glasses, and they're all trick glasses. They'd spill on you when you tipped them up to drink, rubber eggs, and all kinds of prank things.
But I remember one story that she told me that really made her mad. Was she was showering once, and he went and got a cold cup of water and threw it over the thing on her. So I think he was a jokester and probably teased her and kind of gave her a hard time sometimes. But she was madly in love with him, and still.
One night, I guess we were all asleep. Galen and myself and Kent shared a room across the hall from what he called an office. It was a small room with an accordion type door that would close. And we were all basically asleep in the house, and I noticed the light was on over there in that little room. And so I didn't know he was in there, and I got up to go turn the light off because light kind of bothered me. And I got closer, and I heard someone was in there, and I guess I shouldn't have, but I did. And I kind of peeked through because the door wasn't completely closed, and he was in there praying. And he was talking about each of these children, us, and at that particular time I heard my name mentioned. Otherwise I probably would have turned and left. So I stood there long enough to listen to what he had to say, and he was asking at that particular time about me. I was probably 14, and he was just kind of expressing that he was concerned that I was in a time in my life, and I'm not in any trouble, but he was concerned about all of us, and he just mentioned that I would stay true and that I would have the help of my Heavenly Father. That was his request, that my Heavenly Father would help guide me in that particular time of my life. That wasn't the first time. It was pretty common, and I stayed away from there, but it was pretty common that he was there praying in the late hours of the night. I talked to Mom about it, and she says that many a night he'd leave the bed, and that's probably where he ended up. So he was a prayerful man, and in fact, I heard a comment made that people loved to hear him pray. in public meetings, sacrament meetings and so forth, because his prayers were so elegant and perfect, and well deserved for the occasion. They were very, very special, spiritual, and sometimes his prayers were better than any talk given, because they really could touch you. And whenever we had the general conferences and we were able to go to those priesthood meetings, he never once ever said that I had to go. He would express that it was an opportunity and a privilege to go. And you look at it different when you see it that way, that it's a right and privilege to go and hear the prophet speak. Occasionally we would get to go to the tabernacle, not a lot, but when we were able to go, it was a time that we enjoyed. And of course, after those activities, there was always a Fernwoods or something we could go to and get some ice cream. So it wasn't just the meeting. He made it special other ways too, that he appreciated us going. And he let us know that he appreciated our decision to do these things.
Anyway, so the stake presidency was up on the stand in sacrament meeting one day. I think it was ward conference. And my dad referred to, I think it was Arch Milzark, and referred over to him and said, "Arch, I was sticking up for you the other day." And says, "I was out with some people, and there was a guy that was talking bad about you, and I stuck up for you." And so at this, the whole ward's looking and going, "Oh, that Brother Merrell, he's so sweet, sticking up for President Milzark." And he said, "You know what they said about you? They said, that Arch Milzark, he's not fit to live with pigs." He says, "I couldn't believe they would talk that way about you. And I knew better, so I stuck up for you. I said, he is too." I remember, talking that way about a member of the stake presidency. It was kind of a shock to me that he could get away with it, but he did. He was just loved by everybody, and even from the pulpit he could say that the stake presidency member was fit to live with pigs. And he had that kind of sense of humor that I think endeared him to everybody, and he could say and do things because people knew he loved them. He could get away with it.
I don't know so much nowadays, but we used to collect fast offerings, and he always made a point to encourage that we would do it, and how important it was to be honest, to not interfere with the envelopes and how it was done, and to try to be the first ones back and get them turned in, and take care of your routes, and if we wanted to, he would go with us. He didn't have to, but he offered that he would if we would like him to. And of course, we kind of, he kind of made it feel like it was our right and obligation, and we needed to do that on our own. But we knew that he was there to support us. So the way he worded it and the way he did it made you want to do it and participate in the priesthood.
When he'd come home from church, he was tired because he was at church most of the day. And that's when you had the morning sessions and then the evening sessions. And he usually came home after the evening sessions and would be tired and lay down on the floor, and we'd lay down on his arms. He'd spread out and we'd lay down on his arms.
Like, I remember every Sunday, would always, after church, and would be eating and would be sitting around the table, and would always have the conversations of, what did you learn in Sunday school or whatever. And so we always went through that aspect of it. And then we would just start talking and do like family plans and just laugh and tell stories and lots of lies and all of those fun things. And then we'd get up, and whoever's turn was to do the dishes, usually Mom or Dad or both would assist whose ever turn it was. And when all of that was done, Dad would go and lay down on the floor in the living room for his afternoon nap. And it wouldn't be too long before most of us were laying by him, and then pretty soon it was more rolling on him and sitting on him, And then he had to put his arms up, you know, above his head and would stand in his hands, and he'd lift us up high in his hands, and we'd just start doing roughhousing, I guess, that you're not supposed to do in the house, but it was okay and approved because Dad was doing it. But we did that, I guess, every Sunday. I remember growing up with that.
I loved that man. He was a great man.
He wasn't afraid to kiss her right in public. He wasn't afraid, you know, he always called her mommy girl. And he always treated her with great respect. I never saw him do anything but worship her. And if anybody knows Grandma, she deserves it. So obviously he was just doing what the right thing was. But I think it was just natural. He was just madly in love with her. And I remember there were times since then that Mom's told me that he used to just make her nuts, just infuriate her. And she would just get really frustrated with him. And nowadays she says, well, it was because of me, it wasn't him. It was me being selfish or being, you know, petty or being mad or being whatever.
Whenever he'd come home after work every night, he'd come in and say, sweetheart, you know, and usually Mom was in the kitchen fixing dinner or whatever. And he'd always search out Mom first, always go straight to Mom and give her a big hug and kiss. And we'd always get right between them, you know, because we wanted to be part of that loving aspect. But he'd always search Mom out. That was his first thing every day. As soon as he got home, he'd search out Mom, and that'd be a big hug and kiss.
Well, Mom and Dad's relationship was, I guess, best described as tender and respectful. There was never a raised voice in the house. We were never scolded with a loud voice. Mom and Dad never discussed their differences in a loud voice. And so we children only saw a cordial and pleasant household. Now, I'm sure they had differences of opinion. You can't get by without that. And I'm sure there are days when there are heartbreaks, etc. That has to happen. But it was never evidenced to the children. And the opposite was evidenced to us in the kissing and the hugging and the I love you dears. That was common. It was that type of relationship.
Well, you know, a lot of his traveling was when I was younger, so I don't remember that as much. I remember him traveling, but I'm sure that he checked in with her on a regular basis by phone. But I know I'm sure they made up for it when he was home. You know, and they would always spend some time together. Their dates never included money, as far as I remember. But it was, they would go out for a ride, or they'd go up the canyons, or they'd go for a walk, and that's where I guess their real alone time was.
I remember the look of disappointment because I saw that a lot. But I never saw him discouraged or depressed or angry, or I never heard him yell. I know Mom and Dad probably disagreed on stuff. I mean, they were pretty different. And just the mere fact that she's a woman and he's a man, obviously they're different. So they had to have some frustrations. They had to have some real disagreements or different opinions, but they always handled that where I never saw it. And all I saw was that they were always in love, and they were always kind to us kids, and always taught and provided for us like we needed to be provided. But she told me something later on. She said, I don't know why I'd want to marry again, because there's no way I could find somebody as good as your dad. And so once you've had the best, why would you want to settle for something else? And that's true. But 30 years, 33, 35, who knows, 40 years of being alone, that's a lot. That's hard. And so that's some great dedication.
Well, I said that he traveled a lot, which he did, and his patriarchal blessing said that he would be protected wherever he traveled throughout the world. That was one of the phrases in his patriarchal blessing. So I didn't really worry about him not being cared for while he was gone. I just always knew he'd be coming back. And he did, because he just traveled and traveled a lot.
Probably 2 days before he passed away, I was going to go with him down there in that flight. I had been to that site before. They were going to go down and do some surveying and some soil testing and collection for a copper. They took I forgot his name, from a Kennecott copper mine, their soil analysis tester, and he was with them, and I was scheduled, or he had asked me to go with him down there, and I was really looking forward to it. And at the last minute, which was Thursday, I think they left on a Friday morning, and I may be wrong. But anyway, it was a morning before he was to leave. He called me aside. In fact, he took me in that little office, and he says, "Son, I know how much you want to go, but I really feel it'd be best if you stayed home." And kind of looked over things, and he says, "I've got some clients coming in, and if you could just take over the responsibility of getting that downstairs painted." We had done a little fixing up, so that was fine. And when they left that morning, I had a strange feeling that that would be the last that I would see him. I never told anybody. And I kind of had a strange feeling when he told me he didn't want me to go, and I guess that's why I was okay with that, because I'd really like to go.
Yeah, I think we were painting the hall downstairs. Kevin and I were working down there. And he was to come home. We were anxious to get it done before he got home. He's coming back. And so we were just working diligently, and all of a sudden we realized it was 11 o'clock. And he thought he'd be back earlier, like 9 or something. But they were flying in this small plane. A group of 4 of them had gone down to Arizona to look over some kind of sand or rocks or something that they were interested in. And they were to be home that Thursday morning. I remember it was a Thursday. And we recognized what time it was, and we couldn't imagine that they wouldn't be home yet.
But in any case, they were flying home. And as they came, they hit a snowstorm. I think they first hit the snowstorm near Cedar City. But in any case, the pilot continued on, didn't have all-weather gear, I'm sure, for the aircraft. But in any case, when they got up near Fillmore, they were following the railroad tracks, which were not too far from the highway. So they're following those up. And down near Fillmore, they lacked about 5 feet going over one of those old cinder cones. And so crashed.
At that point, they didn't know where the plane was. It just hadn't come in. It was missing. And, but they thought it would probably be in that area. So some of the young men, sons of these men that were in there, decided to go down and help them find the plane. Because they had looked, who does that kind of thing? Anyway, the people that does it for the state had looked for the plane. And when they didn't find it, then these boys decided they were going to go down and help with it. And Kevin said, "No, I'm not going with them, Mom. I'm staying with you. You need somebody to be with you." Now, wasn't that sweet? That was so sweet.
But anyway, LeVar joined the search trying to find out where that aircraft was that had gone down, where Art was a passenger. So he searched for days with the Civil Patrol trying to find it. I don't think he's the one that spotted it, but I do very well remember that he told me that if it had only been about 5 or 10 feet higher, there would have been no crash. So it was truly an accident and an unfortunate one.
And then we got the phone call that the plane had crashed in Milford, Utah, and that no one survived.
And I recall that he was scheduled to come home on a Tuesday from this trip down to Arizona, and we had a game on Friday. Well, his plane never showed up on Tuesday, nor on Wednesday, nor on Thursday, and they had the air patrol out looking for him and trying to find what had happened to this airplane. You pretty much have to figure that the plane crashed because it didn't show up anywhere. And so I had a ball game that night, and I think it was at Highland High. It was either at Highland or East High, and we were playing. And I remember I was on the bench at the time, and my dad had, of course he was gone, so he wasn't at that game like he was at all the other games. And I saw Uncle Eldon and Kevin in the foyer, and they were just outside the gym, and they caught my eye, and Kevin wanted me to come out. And I didn't want to come out. First of all, he was there with Uncle Eldon, and that means they had bad news, and I didn't want to hear the bad news. And so I wouldn't go out. I wouldn't leave the bench and go out there. The game was still playing. Finally, Kevin came in and told the coach that I needed to go out, so the coach sent me out there. And he said they found the plane and there were no survivors. And I didn't know what to do. And so I wanted to go back into the game. And I actually didn't, how often does your dad die? And it's not like a protocol, you know what to do when your heart just got broken. And so I went back in, and I thought, well, I'll play, and I'll play really good. Dad's dead, and he'll watch this game, and all those kind of thoughts. But none of that worked out, and finally the coach says, I think, you probably ought to go.
At the time of my dad's passing, I was up at Utah State University taking some class for the highway department. Liz was up in Pocatello, and I was in the middle of taking the final tests when I got a phone call from Mom. They'd tracked me down, and she said that Dad's plane was missing, and it wasn't encouraging. So after the tests, I went and called Mom that evening to find out if she'd heard anything. But just before I called, I'd heard they had a news broadcast that they'd found the plane and that there was no survivors. And then just like in the same moments later, I was able to talk with Mom and found out that there were no survivors. And so I decided to go up and get Liz, come home, and that was kind of a rough ride, going up to Pocatello, because I just lost my dad, and I felt pretty alone. And it was good to have Liz with me. She was a great comfort, and we drove home and tried to be there for Mom a little bit and a little bit for ourselves. And I think those were some rough times. And you know how you try to be tough and strong and resilient and kind of be the rock a little bit. And so I don't think I really felt my dad's loss, the loneliness, till about 6 months later. And then it was, on a night when I was contemplating and the house was empty and quiet, and it was just a heartbreak. But good long crying got it out of my system. But in the ride up to Pocatello, I do recall that there was some spiritual minutes, and I felt that Dad was there for just moments. There was a little window of comfort that I felt driving up to Pocatello to get Liz the night we found out he was gone. But I guess that's one of the blessings you get when you know that the Spirit's going to be there. And I think it was Dad. Spent some moments with me in the car going up. Yep.
I think I think at the time of his death, the younger children weren't told when they first knew that the plane was missing. And so we found out when we got home from school that the plane had gone down and that Dad was gone. And I think it didn't hit us, the younger ones, as real as it hit the older ones, because they, you know, had the reality. And I think it took several years for it to really sink in. You know, when you start getting your own family and you see that they're missing Grandpa, that's when the real sorrow hit for me.
I think I was up at Dad and Mom's house when we got the phone call that his plane was missing, because it was shortly after that time I mentioned earlier. Can't remember specifics about that, but I was here at the time and tried to be a support for Wilma when that happened. It was a terrible time for us. He had the family of children, and Wilma was going to be all alone with them.
I always enjoyed Art. He was such a neat guy. I remember his red head and his sweet smile. I was devastated when we learned that we had lost Art. I was working at the school, and Wilma called me and said that the plane was down, but they didn't know the results yet, and hard to concentrate that day.
Oh, he was loved by so many people. The day of his funeral was really a very sweet day. It was a hard day, but it was sweet. And it was just wonderful to see how many people loved him. The chapel was full. The cultural hall was almost clear to the back of the cultural hall. It was filled with people from all around, from the stake, from other, he talked in many other areas, public speaking, that type of thing. And to know him was to love him, so when they learned of his death, they just came to his funeral. Everybody was there. And it was just a sweet experience. The talks that were given were so lovely. And it was hard. It was a hard time, but it was a sweet experience.
The things I remember about the funeral, first of all, was that it was so huge. There were so many people that the foyer was filled up in the cultural hall, and people were so the cultural hall was crammed full. The foyers were all full, and there were just people everywhere. I don't remember what was said or any of those kind of things. I remember it was in the morning I woke up and I was pretty upset, and I just got sicker and sicker through the morning until right before the funeral started. I finally was so nauseated that I just went downstairs into the bathroom at the church house, and I just threw up and just threw up and threw up. And finally I just was empty, and I'm sure it was just emotional. And when I was all done, I came up and joined my family. That's how I know that there were so many people, because I had to wind my way through those piles of people to go down to the bathroom and back. And it was just people everywhere.
Oh, as we were walking into the funeral, the casket always goes ahead, of course, and the family follows, and we were immediately behind the casket. And it wasn't an easy thing for any of us, but my sweet little Kent came up behind me and said, "Mom, I'm sick. I feel like I'm going to vomit." And so we were far enough into the chapel that we just couldn't disperse and go, so he went by himself down to the bathroom. He was really sick. I think the passing of his father, probably, but he had to go down, and he had a problem with his tummy, and He was gone some few minutes. I was getting concerned about him, but he came back up and joined the family. So I'll always remember that, because I felt torn whether I should be with him or whether I should be back there with the family. But he did do this all alone by himself.
And then after the funeral, we went down to the mortuary, or to the cemetery where he was buried. And I remember as we pulled off of 33rd South and into the chapel, or into the mortuary, when we pulled off of 33rd into the cemetery, that I looked back up 33rd, and that's when you'd go in caravans. And there were cars going clear up. You could see them forever. You couldn't see the end of the cars. And somebody said that it was such a long procession that they were still pulling out of the church parking lot when we were pulling into the cemetery. So, I mean, there were hundreds of cars. And he was very beloved.
Yes, it was very hard for us all, but Heavenly Father helped us with the sweet spirit that we needed. I think we can all look back on it as a sad, sad time, but as a sweet experience. I just think it was a sweet experience. It was a lovely service. And friends, my goodness, we knew he was loved because we had lots of friends.
And there was a feeling that everything's going to be okay, and that this is just another phase of life, and there shouldn't be heartbreak or loneliness, because we'll all be together again.
The funeral and the viewings and those kinds of things were not real. I think it was a closed casket, and there was a lot of family support, and it was actually a very sweet experience, I think. Peaceful. Fortunately, we know what life is about, so it was okay.
In any case, he was buried in Salt Lake. And though I was late getting there, I was very interested to note that there was still a long line attempting to go into the mortuary. To folks there were going in to give their final respects to Wilma and the family. A long line. I was waiting in line, and someone recognized I was a stranger and was in uniform. They asked where I was from. I told them, and they inquired how come I was there. I told them it was my brother. And they arranged to scoot me up the front.
We had food brought to this house that would have fed an army. And I was the Stake Relief Society president at that time. So it was not just our ward that was bringing things in. It was the presidencies of all of the wards. Go look and see what it is. It was the presidencies of all of the wards that were bringing things in. Everybody, well, see, the whole stake knew Arthur. They all knew him, and most of them knew me, so we were well known among the area. And people came from everywhere because of their love for him. And they just couldn't bring enough things. Finally, I had to say, please, I asked my Relief Society, please tell the other wards not to bring anything more, and don't you bring anything more. Had to.
Get so much food.
Oh my goodness, yes. But that was, see, that was just one way they showed their love. It was just every way you looked. Everybody that knew him loved him. So it was easy for him to do kind things for him.
A member of the stake presidency spoke at the funeral, who was a business associate of his, and made the comment that was one thing that he would miss, is hearing Arthur Merrell's prayers. And so it was a very special meeting, but it wasn't sad, because I don't know, his presence was there too.
It fit Arthur to a T. It was just it just fit his being, his personality. We're very well done. Kind of sad. It's a nice funeral.
I think Mom might have sensed it too. But Dad he had done some things before that trip that was a little different. He had counseled me in that little discussion that he wanted me to be in charge of some things, which was strange because he'd never done that before. He told me that I would need to take care of this and take care of that when he got home could have done it himself. So I think in his own mind he sensed something wasn't right. And I understand that he had already set some things in place for Mom too. That I don't know all the details, but I think some legal paperwork had been taken care of, and I think Mom probably knows all the details on that. I don't. So he knew. I think he sensed, he knew, and he had made the preparations for something. And so that's pretty much that part of it, as far as, you know, what I know of his death. I think he'd kind of prepared me for something. There's some other things that he spoke about that I kind of hold dear to me at this time, but he knew something, and he was trying to. And I think in all those rides and the plane rides and the things, he would take me to work when I could have drove myself, and he'd always talk to me about things. And this was just a few weeks before this trip, so there was something that he was wanting to get in place, whether he knew it or not. There was something that was driving him to talk to me, and he talked about my mission, which is very soon to come, and he was talking about other things, and I think that was why. And it made sense afterwards.
I never knew him anything but bald. Of course, he had a little more hair when I met him than he did when he passed away, but and bless his little heart, he was redheaded, so his skin was very light, and he'd just have to be in the sun a few minutes and he'd get a sunburn. So with this cute little bald head that he always had to wear a hat when he was out, and he chose to wear caps with a little bill out here in front. And he had that very favorite one that was plaid. I can't remember for sure if it was black and white or blue and white, but it was a plaid hat, and then he had this little red ball of yarn that he had me make him a little ball of yarn to sew on the top of that cap. And that was a conversation piece everywhere he went. And he was just very comfortable wearing it. And it lived for many years, and its home was the top of his head. And he was so cute in it.
One of them, and this was when I was very young, because when I hit teenager years, of course he passed away when I was 15, but I remember him going with all of the youth when we went on a river trip down the Green River. And he used to wear this Scottish, I don't know what they're called, the Scottish hats, and with a little beanie sitting on top of it. And that's what we all knew him as. So it was like a plaid hat with this beanie, this ball, pom-pom, whatever you want to call it, sewn right on the top of it. And I remember going down the river. I had broken my arm playing out in the backyard. And that's another lesson I learned. Don't do that on Sunday. But I wanted to go down the river with everybody. And so I took a big plastic bag and had it all wrapped up to try to keep it dry as we're going down this river. But we got to these rapids, and my dad was sitting right on the back of the boat, this big raft. We were going down, and we hit these rapids, And as we came down this thing, the back end of the raft came off this big bunch of the rapids that we were going over and down. And it bounced just enough that it flipped him a flip backwards right off the raft and into the water. And we just remember that the hat with the pom-pom on it floating by, and I couldn't do anything. I had a broken arm and kind of stressed and worried what was going on. And there's my dad just laughing his guts out, floating past us, going down the river in that water. And so he was very involved with all of us in the youth growing up.
Okay, one of the incidents I recall was the time when my dad was sick, and Wilma had been up taking care of him, and I decided I would go from California. I came and went up to the house, and Wilma was there and Arthur was there. I think he had come to pick her up, maybe to take her back. So while he was there, he said, say, Glenda, do you know how they measure people for a coffin? And for a time he'd worked with a mortuary as I don't know, just doing whatever he did, but so that seemed a reasonable question for him to ask. And he says, lay down on the floor there, I'll show you. So he says, well, first you put your arms out like this, and then you put your legs out, then you put your leg up in the sky. And so I put my leg up in the sky, and the dumb goof poured a glass of water down my pant leg. We just laughed. I was already on the floor, so I just rolled around. We laughed a lot about that. And he loved to play tricks on people. He loved it.
But I remember one story that she told me that really made her mad. Was she was showering once, and he went and got a cold cup of water and threw it over the thing on her. So I think he was a jokester and probably teased her and kind of gave her a hard time sometimes. But she was madly in love with him.
I know he did a million. I don't remember any specific jokes that he did. He always had Grandma and Grandpa to the edge where you'd wonder for a minute if they were going to be mad, but then they'd end up laughing and having fun with it.
I would just give anything if I could remember some of Art's witticisms. You know, he was loaded, and there were some dandies there.
I remember those two German fellows. My version of this story just comes from my memory, so I'll see how close it is. I was not living at home at the time. I was married to a sweet little lady, and we were off making a family. But as I remember, that Dad was working downtown and met the two German tourists, late teens if I remember right, and met them on the temple grounds. And being the type of person he was, outgoing, I think he gave them his phone number if they had any questions about the church or some such. And they were and so after the stay in the hospital of this young German boy, he needed some time to continue healing. And so Dad offered the home, and they came and lived at Mom and Dad's house for several weeks into that summer. And Liz and I went up there on our visits, and that's when we discovered that they had new Merrells in the house. And from what I understand, that a friendship grew out of there, and it's lasted for some years now.
Arthur was responsible for that too. He was a guy that could talk to anybody, whether he knew him or not. And he was coming home from work one night out on the street downtown and ran across these two young German men, and they were standing on the corner kind of like they didn't know what to do or where they were, or just needing some help. So he walked up to them, introduced himself. They spoke English, very good English. And so he was talking to them and asked them if he could help them, which was typical of Arthur, very typical of Arthur. And they said, well, they wanted to stay in Salt Lake that night. Could he direct them to a place to stay? And they didn't have a lot of money because they were touring the United States on foot and just kind of, I guess, earning a little money as they went here and there for their expenses. But he said, sure, I'll take you on with me. Would you like to come home with me? My wife will have dinner, and we'll we'll visit and you can stay there. And then in the morning, they wanted to leave Salt Lake the next day, and he told them that in the morning he would take them out to the road on the way to Tooele. They could go on west as they were trying to get to California. And so he brought them home. It was a surprise to me when he came walking in with these two darling German boys with kind of stick bags over their shoulder and little, not really luggage, just kind of little bags of things that they were carrying with them.
In fact, I tell my kids about that every so often when you know, Dad just felt impressed to bring these guys home, and we learned a lot. It was fun to have them in our home, and I guess there was quite a bond that we developed.
And so we visited with them that night, and we went out in the yard and kind of played games and just kind of did fun things to have them with us. And since they spoke such good English, we got along very well, and the girls were nearer their age, so they could visit and learn about the German people, and they could learn about how our girls did this part of their life. It was just a pleasant experience, and they stayed the night, and the next morning we got up early because they wanted to get started going west, and so Arthur drove them out to the highway there and dropped them off, and then he went on to work.
They were hitchhiking across the United States. The car they had got to hitchhike, they went out here on I-80 heading west to California, and the car flipped over or sideways or something, an accident, and one of the young men was injured severely. He was scraped on the ground. I think he had a broken bones too. And so the next thing Dad knew is that he received a telephone call that this young German boy was in the hospital and help.
And so I called Arthur, and he ran out and went to the hospital and visited with them. And the one had to stay in the hospital because he had some real damaged legs. He was in bad shape. And the other one came back to stay at our house. And it was Stefan Klaus and Holger Otten were their names. And Stefan was the one that was hurt in the accident, and Holger came back and stayed here at our home. They were here probably another 5 or 6 weeks because Stefan had to stay in the hospital for quite a while before he could come home, and then we kept him here for a while till he was ready to go back to his hitchhiking program. But that was a nice experience.
After they went back to Germany, they sent us, me I guess in particular, some German cars, kind of like the Matchbox cars that we have here that were fun, that I still have in my collection at home that the kids are playing with. But it's fond memories, not so much the memory of those guys being there, even though I do remember them being there, and one of them winding up in the hospital after the accident. But the memory of Dad actually listening to the Spirit and listening and bringing them to our home, and you know, the learning and the good feel that you get from knowing that we helped them out, that we learned a lot from them, and hopefully they learned a lot from us and from Dad in particular.
Everything that he did was gospel-based. You knew that he had a testimony and that was first and foremost in his life, and everything that he did, he wanted to share that with you. I'm sorry.
I remember my dad just being he was always doing one of these projects. And I asked him, Dad, I mean, how come we're always doing that? He goes, well, you just always do the Lord's work. And in one of the questions that I asked him, I said, but why? I mean, you could go down to the office and it'd be more comfortable and you'd make money. And the lesson that he taught me, I've never forgotten, he says, if I do the Lord's work, he'll do my work. And he does my work better than I do. And so I like the way he does my work. And so I'm always going to do the Lord's work first. I've never forgotten that lesson. And I hope to have it be my motto, but he taught me, always do the Lord's work first, because then the Lord will do yours. And he's proven that to me 1,000 times, and will still.
I guess the teaching how to respect women, treat women, had to come through example. He, of course, treated Mom perfectly, and he treated all other women gentlemanly, and he would not, in his discussions, would not demean women in his discussions and descriptions and stories and stuff. Everything was proper and good. I don't recall him ever giving me instructions on how to be a proper young man. He didn't need to. His example taught just fine. Yep.
Another opportunity of work that I remember him teaching me, another lesson, was when Kevin had a number of great friends, and he included me a lot. So we grew up, even though we were 3 years apart, we were pretty good friends. And Doug Croft was one of those guys, and he had a boat. And so Randy Voorhees and Roger Wilson and Jim Brammer and Doug Croft and those guys would go out and goof around and have their good times. Well, one time they came over, it was some evening. They said, "Kevin, tomorrow we're gonna go, I've got the boat, we're gonna go water skiing." Kevin said, "I can't, I gotta work." He was working in the weigh station, which is the little toll booth thing where they weighed trucks at a gravel yard for Staker gravel or whatever it was, which was a hot, sweaty, dirty, filthy job. But I think he made $2 an hour, $2.50 an hour, or $3 an hour or something. It wasn't very much. But he was working in this weigh station in a pretty crude environment. And I had been down there and seen him a couple of times, so I knew that it was a mess and difficult work and not enjoyable at all. And so he wanted to go so bad, and he couldn't get off work just overnight. And all the guys were going to go water skiing. So he was kind of fretting over that. So Dad said, "Well, call your boss and see if I go down and work in the weigh station and I do the weighing stuff, then you can have the day off." And so Kevin took him up on that, and he made those arrangements. I don't remember how he did it, but he made those arrangements, and so Dad was going to go down and work in the weigh station. For some reason, I either volunteered or I got asked to go, or I was a nutcase and showed up. I don't know whatever happened, but I ended up working in that weigh station with Dad all day. And by hot afternoon, it was hot and sweaty and miserable, and I was tired of that. I was ready to be done. And I mean, these big trucks had come through, all dusty and dirty, and get on the scales, and we'd weigh them in and write down the stuff and give them a receipt and then drive away, whatever that whole process was. And finally I said, "Dad, I can't believe, why on earth would you do this? You could be," and at the time, Dad had an office in the Kennecott building. It's kitty corner from Temple Square downtown. He was on the 10th floor. It was a really nice office, comfortable and nice, furniture, and it was a nice place, comfortable and exotic and good, and not some dirty, filthy, hot, unair-conditioned weigh station in the middle of August. I said, "Why would you do this? You could be at work and you're making $2 an hour or $3 or whatever the price was." And he said, "Look, we're on earth to make other people's lives better. And by us coming here, we made it so Kevin could enjoy going out with his friends. Isn't that what our purpose is? Isn't that what we're supposed to do?" And I don't remember exact words, but basically it was, if we can make someone else's life more enjoyable, isn't that our purpose? Isn't that what we're supposed to do? And I'd like to learn that lesson and actually do that lesson, but that was a great one. And that's the kind of man he was. That's the way he taught, was, first of all, by example. He didn't say, "Kent, I think you need to go work for Kevin so that he can go water skiing, because I've got a nice job that earns more money, and so it makes no sense for me to go. You are worthless. You go work in the weigh station." And so, instead, he goes and does it and teaches me a lesson. And I think that's the way my dad did everything. I imagine Kevin and Galen and everybody else had those same kind of teaching opportunities. But I don't know, that's why I love them.